Well, greetings once again from my video library. Wayne Bryan here with Music Theater Wichita, and awfully happy to have another Wayne Wednesday. And very happy that some of you are actually sending in questions. So keep it up. I hope some of you got to watch the Jester Awards that aired on Sunday with all of our tributes to the talents of young performers and students and teachers, all the people who make the Jester Awards such a thrilling thing for us every year. Two people wrote in and asked somewhat the same question, and it ties into a question that we got last week as well. Both Cindy Kelly and Gail Hamblin asked about some artwork that you usually see up on the top shelf in this room. And of course, I work in the theater, and of course, great art to me are costume designs and scenic renderings. That's about all I find I have room for on my shelves here, other than videos and books and records and CDs and all the other things that fill up my walls on shelves. But where I do have space, I try to put some artwork and, if possible, original artwork that has something to do with the shows we did. A couple weeks ago, Edward Sturm asked how we go about planning for a show once we've determined that we're going to do a particular title. How do we approach the design aspects of it? So this is a perfect thing to talk about today. I came in 1988. I arrived in April. The shows were set for that season. I had no history of being a producer. I had to really learn everything by making mistakes and asking for help, and everyone was, in fact, very helpful. So I got through that first season, and I got to the end of it, and I thought, wow, I learned a lot. It sure would be fun to do this for one more summer, which would be the summer of 1989. But if I get to pick the shows and I get to pick the directors and the designers. So 1989 was the first year for which I got to do that. We'd had some complaints that the dancing wasn't always quite up to par in those days at Music Theater Wichita. So we determined that we would find some first-rate dancers for the 1989 season. And in that year, we programmed My One and Only, a very dancey Tommy Tune show, A Chorus Line, and 42nd Street, which was still running on Broadway at that point, but we got the rights to do it. Well, 42nd Street is a huge show, so I thought it would be okay to start the season with a small show. And I had been in a show in New York called Tintypes. It was nominated for Best Musical, Tony Award in 1980. It's a cast of only 5. There's one fellow who's an immigrant. There's one fellow who is a powerful white man of class and power. There is one young lady who is an immigrant arrival, one who is a woman of color who is in the working class, and one lady who is powdered and pink and protected by her man. And these were all very archetypal characters of the 1900s when Tintypes is set. And in the New York company, I stood by for the two men who played the immigrant man and the powerful man. And I fortunately got to go on quite a bit for both of them, and then played those roles at other theaters around the country. In our production, I played the immigrant. Kevin Reese played T.R., the powerful man. Nedra Dixon, who had created the role, played Susanna, the woman of color. Jane Fleming, later Collinsworth, played Emma, the immigrant woman. And the lovely Charlene Ayers played Anna, the powdered and pink person. In the course of the show, each of them takes on some specific historical personas. T.R. becomes Teddy Roosevelt. Emma becomes Emma Goldman, the activist. And Anna, the powdered and pink lady, becomes Anna Held, Ziegfeld's first leading lady and star. I hope you can see that without the glare there. This is a costume rendering by the incredible Peggy Kellner. I got my start at the Old Globe Theater in San Diego, where Peggy designed all the sets and all the costumes for many years. And when I was given this assignment here in Wichita, she was one of the few designers I knew. So when we determined to do Tintypes, I called Peggy and said, I don't suppose you'd want to come to Wichita, Kansas, and design costumes for 5 people, would you? And she said, well, sure, honey. So she showed up, and she came every year then until illness forced her to stop. But she created maybe a couple thousand costumes for us, including shows like Wizard of Oz, which had 300 costumes in it all by itself. So she created that and gave me the rendering to remember the first year that I got to design sets and costumes and pick the shows. She is a wonderful woman, and we'll do a whole tribute to her on one of these later programs. One thing that helps, if you know one talented person, chances are they know some others. So for the next year, 1990, I decided we would do Carousel, which was one of my favorite shows and the one that actually got me interested in musical theater. And if you have a chance, go to YouTube and type in the original cast, John Raitt and Jan Clayton, and see them do If I Loved You, which is in a scene called the bench scene. The bench scene is the second scene of the show, and it takes place in one set location. It's quite a lengthy scene, so you need something interesting for the audience to look at with only a park bench in front of it. This was designed by a colleague of Peggy Kellner's at the University of Arizona. Now he is the Dean of the Theatrical Fine Arts at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln. His name is Chuck O'Connor. And he designed this rendering of the bench scene for Carousel. And he did some really clever things. You know, the story involves a kind of braggart of a fellow, not a great marital risk, but actually a man of substance and wealth of qualities that people don't see. And so the marriage between him and Julie Jordan, the factory girl, is fraught with danger, but there is real love in their relationship. Well, Julie is a factory worker, and Chuck O'Connor in this rendering puts a nasty little smoke plume coming out of factories in the distance to remind you that factory girls at that time worked in not the best circumstances, and maybe even an imperfect marriage would seem worth considering when your other circumstances are not ideal. So that was something that a designer can bring that brings depth to the context of a story and gives the actor something to play off of as well. That rendering was designed by Chuck O'Connor, but it was painted by a marvelous Chinese artist named Shusheng He. And Shusheng was a student at the University of Arizona, where Chuck was teaching and where Peggy also worked. And it turned out that Shusheng was a marvelous designer on his own. So the very next year, 1991, we chose to do The King and I, and had Shusheng design the sets for The King and I. And this is the opening scene where Anna arrives in Siam and is met by the Kralahome and is introduced to this whole new strange way of life that she's going to spend the next years pursuing. And again, this was a drop of enormous depth and feeling. And as wonderful as Shusheng's rendering is, the actual backdrop, which was 55 feet wide by 26 feet high, was even more beautiful. And it tells us a lot about Anna's environment that she's going into. So these are the kind of artwork that I have on my walls. Shusheng is retired now in California, but we brought him out of retirement last year to design and paint the alpine backdrops that were so beautiful in The Sound of Music. It's a fascinating thing how people can collaborate with each other and hopefully bring out the best in each other. And I've been so blessed to have these artists agree to come work with us. And they like the environment and they like the positive work attitude that our young people have. So those are some of the artworks on my wall. Thank you, Cindy and Gail, for asking. We hope we'll see you on Friday for a Flashback Friday. And we hope you stay with us. We'll have some important news coming soon about our season. So thanks for tuning in today.